I had committed myself to volunteering at the Harmony House Community Kitchen every single major holiday since I had commenced my college studies, viewing it as my dedicated way of fulfilling a moral obligation to give back to the community. It was supposed to be a place defined by safety, by selflessness, a sanctuary where genuinely good people perform genuinely good deeds. That was the deeply comforting narrative I constantly repeated to myself. That was the foundational belief I held as absolutely true. But I was tragically and profoundly mistaken. My friend, Maya, and the other remaining student volunteers had efficiently packed up all their gear and departed the premises around 10 p.m. "Are you coming with us, Sam?" she had called out to me. I had hesitated slightly, feeling a strange obligation to linger. "I am just going to quickly assist Chef Marcus with cleaning these massive pots. He appears absolutely exhausted," I had replied honestly.
Chef Marcus.
Marcus Hayes. He was the chief coordinator, a man likely in his late 50s, possessing a large, bulky frame, a supposedly kind, reliable face, and a perpetual, rugged 5 o'clock shadow. Everyone involved with the center outwardly adored him. He was, by common consensus, the emotional heart and reliable soul of Harmony House. Yet he was also the solitary person who had skillfully managed to keep me here, isolated, long after everyone else had left.
No, Sam.
You really should go home now. I can easily manage this final cleaning myself. You have contributed more than enough tonight." He had initially insisted, yet I noticed an odd, almost nervous tension lingering in his mannerisms. But the very second the last person walked out the door and the lock audibly clicked, Marcus's intention abruptly and completely changed. "Actually, Sam, could I possibly convince you to remain for just a few minutes longer?" he requested, slowly wiping his hands on his heavily stained apron. "I absolutely must perform a complete, verifiable inventory of the remaining canned goods before tomorrow's enormous Black Friday donation drive commences. It is realistically a two-person job, and I simply cannot trust any of the other students to get the count right. You, however, are reliably meticulous." I agreed immediately, feeling a wave of unexpected flattery wash over me. Despite the fact it was nearing midnight, I felt a deep, ingrained obligation to assist him. I followed him down the narrow, dimly lit concrete steps leading into the vast basement storage room. It was an oppressive, cramped space, dominated by endless rows of metal shelving stacked impossibly high with thousands of identical cans and boxes. The stagnant air down here was noticeably stale, damp, and freezing cold. "I will begin with the rows of canned potatoes. You take responsibility for the entire cranberry sauce section. We will systematically meet in the middle," Marcus instructed, handing me a clipboard and a tiny, almost useless pencil. I worked diligently for the next 20 minutes, focused completely on my assigned task. The sound of water striking metal was the only persistent noise, punctuated by the faint scratching of my pencil against the paper and the faraway rhythm of the persistent leaky sink. I consistently called out the requested numbers: cranberry sauce, whole berry type, case 14, 72 units remaining. There was no reply from the other side of the high shelves. "Marcus," I called out again, a little louder, hoping to pierce the silence. Still no reply. I carefully maneuvered past the towering, precarious shelves of canned beans toward the area where he had been working. He was completely gone. The specific section where he'd been counting was entirely empty. His own clipboard lay abandoned on the concrete floor. And right beside it, I saw an object that made my stomach drop into a terrifying void. A heavy, industrial-grade metal combination padlock. My blood turned instantly and completely cold. Why would he ever require a high-security padlock down here in the basement? The main door leading up to the kitchen was already securely locked from the outside after 10 p.m. I spun around and frantically scrambled back up the concrete steps, throwing my full weight against the heavy metal fire door at the top. It remained absolutely unmoving. I gripped the handle and frantically twisted it. Locked. My heart slammed relentlessly against my ribs with panicked force. I frantically yanked open the small, reinforced square window embedded in the door, peering desperately through the thick glass. The massive, bright kitchen was now enveloped in a thick, chilling darkness. A single, weak desk lamp was glowing on in the distant coordinator's office. And sitting calmly at the desk, not performing any inventory but instead calmly flipping through a small, worn, leather-bound book, was Marcus. I hammered fiercely on the metal door, the sound muffled by the solid steel. "Marcus, you have to let me out right now. I am finished with the inventory. I am freezing down here. Open the door. Please," I shouted, the volume bordering on hysteria. He slowly, deliberately raised his large head, and he looked directly at me through the small, reinforced pane of glass. And the expression on his face was not the kind, world-weary look of a man exhausted from a day of charitable service. It was a look of complete, unnerving, and profound self-satisfaction. He stood up very slowly, walked over to the door, and then stopped short, pointedly not unlocking it. He spoke through the thick, reinforced glass, his voice slightly muffled yet chillingly clear. "You truly did an excellent job tonight, Sam. A truly beautiful job. So wonderfully kind. So incredibly helpful. It truly is a profound shame when truly good people are exploited by the world. Isn't it? Marcus, whatever this is, it is absolutely not funny. Let me out of this basement. Now!" I screamed, my voice finally beginning to crack under the overwhelming pressure. "No, no jokes are intended, my dear," he replied calmly, holding up the worn leather-bound book for me to see. "This is my personal journal, my meticulous record. I possess a very special, detailed collection of particularly unique things. Things I can only ever successfully acquire on quiet, isolated nights such as this one, when everyone is far too distracted by the noise of the holiday to ever notice a solitary, missing volunteer. You have been so incredibly generous with your time up to this point, Sam. Now, I require you to be equally generous with something else. Something profoundly personal. Something I intend to keep forever." I backed away instantly from the door, my breathing ragged and desperately shallow. He was clearly not demanding money or the kitchen assets. He was speaking about something deeply personal. Something unspeakably horrific. The terrifying truth slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Was I truly trapped down here with a dangerous collector of people? And what specific, terrifying addition was he planning to make to his journal tonight, using me? I scrambled frantically back into the depths of the basement, my fear driving me onward. I absolutely had to find a different, hidden exit. I ran blindly through the rows of towering canned goods, desperately searching for a maintenance door, a crawl space, any viable escape route. I could clearly hear Marcus walking slowly, methodically above me, his heavy footsteps echoing with an eerie precision across the now empty, vast kitchen floor. Then I spotted it. A small, severely rusted hatch door set low into the unforgiving concrete foundation wall. It looked suspiciously like it led to a forgotten storm drain or an old, abandoned pipe system. I rushed toward it, grabbing the handle. It was slick with years of accumulated grime and felt incredibly stiff and heavy. I pulled and pulled with desperate, raw strength until my fingers were scraped raw and bleeding. It finally gave way with a loud, sickening metallic friction of rusty hinges being brutally forced open. A horrible, wet, foul odor instantly assailed my nostrils. I barely registered the stench. I dropped instantly to my knees and peered into the deep, absolute blackness of the hole. It was a dark, narrow, unforgiving tunnel, clearly far too small to accommodate a large man of his size, but just possibly small enough for my frantic body to squeeze through. I wedged myself halfway inside, tears of sheer, agonizing terror now streaming silently down my face. Did this foul, restrictive tunnel actually lead to any place safe or habitable? Or was I simply crawling deeper into the earth, ensuring my own cold death by exposure or suffocation. I heard the heavy, definitive thud of Marcus's feet coming down the basement steps, his descent slow, unnervingly deliberate. I scrambled further into the pipe, pulling myself forward.
Sam.
You really should stop doing that. You are going to get yourself needlessly dirty down there. I genuinely wanted this to be a clean process, he called down, his voice now sounding impossibly close, right at the base of the concrete stairs. It is Thanksgiving night. You should try to be thankful that you are going to be properly remembered in my journal. I am certainly coming to retrieve you, Sam. You cannot hide from me for long. He appeared suddenly at the bottom of the steps, a dark, massively looming figure silhouetted against the faint, dim kitchen light filtering down from above. He was carrying something profoundly heavy, something that caught the dim light and glinted wickedly. It was a long-handled, menacingly rusty-looking bolt cutter, a tool designed for brutal force. Was he intending to brutally cut the very pipe I was frantically hiding inside? I realized with terrifying clarity that I had to act much, much faster than he could. I squirmed desperately deeper into the absolute darkness of the pipe, pushing past unexpected lumps of stagnant, icy water and slick, heavy grime. Then, my probing fingers suddenly brushed against something solid, cold, and metallic. I immediately stopped my movement. It was a thick, heavy brass valve, a crucial water valve sticking stubbornly out of the pipe wall. The truth of my location suddenly clicked into place. This was not merely a random storm drain. This was the main, high-pressure water line access running directly beneath the massive kitchen structure. If I managed to violently turn this heavy valve, could I possibly manage to unleash a destructive flood into the basement, momentarily incapacitating him? Or would my panicked action simply result in drowning myself and him together in the rising, freezing water? I knew I had zero time remaining to carefully weigh the crushing ethical or physical consequences. Marcus was already crawling slowly toward the pipe opening, his massive shoulder barely fitting between the narrow shelving units, his intent clear. I gripped the cold, unforgiving brass handle with every last ounce of my rapidly depleting strength and wrenched it counterclockwise with a desperate, all-or-nothing motion. Nothing happened for one agonizing, heart-stopping second of silence. Then, I heard a sound like 1,000 angry hornets immediately followed by a deafening, incredibly high-pressure sound of escaping water, a violent geyser of icy, dark water exploding outward from the weakened joint where the old pipe met the valve. It was not a gentle leak. It was a devastating, powerful rupture. The sudden, massive spray of the water was so incredibly powerful that it instantly drowned out Marcus's surprised, gurgling shout. The fierce jet of high-pressure water slammed with force against the low concrete ceiling of the basement, showering the entire lower level with an instantaneous, freezing deluge. Marcus cried out, not in simple pain, but in sheer, chaotic shock and overwhelming, sudden fury. The rapidly accumulating water on the floor was already several inches deep and rising with terrifying speed, and he was violently thrashing, scrambling desperately backward as the heavy spray hit the nearby, exposed electrical junction box mounted precariously low on the damp wall. The high-voltage electricity. I realized the devastating consequence. A sudden, blinding, shattering flash of blue-white light instantly illuminated the entire basement space, followed immediately by the terrifying, prolonged sound of sizzling, crackling electrical chaos. The main power source for the entire building had instantaneously short-circuited and failed. The only light filtering down from the kitchen above died completely. The world plunged into an absolute, deafening, echoing darkness, punctuated only by the ongoing aquatic disaster. I could no longer hear any distinct sound from him. Only the relentless, thundering roar of the ruptured pipe and the powerful, frantic sloshing of the rapidly accumulating water filled the air. I knew with absolute certainty that this terrifying chaos was my final opportunity. The total darkness and the deafening roar of the water were my only defenses. I utilized the absolute pitch blackness, pulling myself backward out of the pipe with agonizing difficulty, scrambling desperately up the concrete steps, praying intensely that Marcus was either profoundly disoriented or, ideally, permanently neutralized. I burst through the top door, dripping wet and gasping for breath, stumbling back into the main kitchen hall. It was completely dark, absolutely black. I could still hear the distant, terrifying roar of the basement flood continuing its destructive path. Had he somehow followed me up the steps? Was he now right behind me in the confusing darkness, ready to strike? I did not dare stop for a single second to check my pursuer's status. I ran blindly through the vast space, tripping violently over the large, heavy industrial mop bucket near the sink, slamming my vulnerable shoulder hard into the cold steel counter. My singular, burning goal was the main exit door, the front entrance. But I remembered with sickening clarity that Marcus always manually locked the inner deadbolt at night, and the necessary key was still in his distant office. Wait, I realized there was another option. The windows. I vividly recalled the existence of the large, old aluminum-framed windows that faced the deserted parking lot. They were supposed to be professionally secured for the night, but I had distinctly seen the internal latch on one near the pantry looking suspiciously loose and unsecured earlier that evening. I sprinted toward the pantry, my movement guided only by the faint, filtered, hazy light of the distant street lamp outside the service entrance. I found the designated window. It was exceptionally heavy, and the latch mechanism was definitely jammed, but I confirmed it was not actually locked with the key. I leaned my entire weight violently against the cold glass, forcefully pushing the old, weak aluminum frame outward. With a grinding metallic friction of old, stressed metal against metal, the entire window finally gave way just enough to create a gap. A small opening appeared, not quite wide enough to simply step through comfortably, but potentially wide enough for my terrified body to squeeze through. I did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. I threw myself headfirst out of the jagged opening, the sharp metal and glass scraping painfully and deeply against my hip and shoulder. I landed hard and awkwardly on the cold, wet asphalt of the deserted parking lot outside, the impact jarring my entire body. But I was finally free. I scrambled onto my feet and began to run, running blindly past the empty, silent cars, running frantically toward the comforting, distant glow of the main road streetlights. I ran until I completely collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably and violently, onto the brightly lit curb of the nearest massive gas station, located exactly 4 blocks away. Behind me, the imposing Harmony House community kitchen stood utterly dark and ominously silent against the cold, late Thanksgiving night, except for the frantic, flashing sequence of blue and red light that was now reflecting violently off the kitchen windows. The police were already rapidly arriving at the scene, undoubtedly drawn by the sheer force of the flood and the sudden, complete power outage. I am the general manager of the electronics section at a major, sprawling suburban department store, a position that always guarantees the absolute worst of the holiday season chaos, and this year, Thanksgiving had been nothing more than a mandatory 3-hour reprieve before my mandatory return at 11 p.m. for the critical midnight launch of Black Friday promotions. The entire store was an absolute fortress of highly valuable, deeply discounted merchandise. Rows upon rows of 80-inch televisions, stacks of the latest, most coveted gaming consoles, and sealed pallets containing thousands of high-end cell phones, all sitting there like glistening, irresistible bait in the dim, warehouse-like interior. I had spent the last 2 exhausting hours meticulously confirming the final placement of the high-ticket items, locking the glass security cabinets, and making sure the main cash office safe was correctly double-bolted. Yet throughout the entire process, I had been completely unable to shake the pervasive, nagging feeling of being watched from the shadows of the high, dark ceilings. It was now 20 minutes past midnight, and the air inside the store was unnervingly cold and still, a sharp, unpleasant contrast to the artificial warmth of my own home only a few hours prior, and the colossal 2-story space was illuminated only by the faint, eerie glow of the exit signs and the high-mounted, unreliable emergency floodlights that cast long, grotesque shadows down the endless aisles. My other 5 team members were strategically placed throughout the building, currently engaged in final price changes and setting up the barricades near the main entrance. Yet the entire building felt completely deserted, swallowing any small noises they might have been making. Was I the only one who had noticed the catastrophic failure of the entire security system? And why was the internal communication radio on my hip buzzing with nothing but static? I moved cautiously down the main electronics aisle, navigating the confusing labyrinth of black, silent televisions, when I suddenly heard the first distinct, horrifying sound that confirmed my worst fears. The sharp, unmistakable tink of metal striking concrete coming from the far-off loading dock area. It was a small sound, instantly absorbed by the thick carpet and the vast space, but it was absolutely the sound of someone heavy carrying something even heavier, a sound that should have been accompanied by the frantic, jarring blare of the commercial-grade alarm. I instinctively ducked behind a towering stack of oversized drone boxes, my heart pounding a frantic, useless rhythm against the fabric of my work shirt. I cautiously peered around the corner, my breath shallow and controlled, trying to see down the long, dark corridor leading toward the warehouse area. Nothing was immediately visible, but the profound silence was now even more terrifyingly charged, suggesting that whoever was down there was moving with a purposeful, practiced stealth. I slowly, painstakingly drew my small internal radio from my hip, whispering urgently into the microphone. Security breach. Code red. East loading dock is compromised. I need immediate eyes and confirmation. Over. But the only response I received was the same insistent, useless hiss of pure static electricity. Then, 2 large, imposing figures emerged from the gloom of the warehouse entry bay, moving with an athletic, terrifying grace that suggested military-style training, not frantic opportunism. They were both entirely covered in black clothing, wearing dark, non-reflective gloves, and their faces were fully concealed beneath heavy, featureless ski masks. One of them was holding a large, heavy duffel bag, while the other held a wicked, specialized pry bar, its chrome shining dully in the weak emergency light, a tool designed specifically for silently breaching steel doors. They moved directly toward the high-value phone display cases. Were they solely interested in the merchandise, or had they been specifically instructed to neutralize any potential employees they might find? I realized with a crushing, sickening certainty that my team was completely scattered and probably completely unaware of the mortal danger currently unfolding around them. My first, most critical priority became finding the nearest employee and silently warning them, getting them to the designated emergency rendezvous point located safely inside the heavily fortified cash office vault. I began crawling silently on my hands and knees through the dark aisles, using the towering shelving units and the looming stacks of unboxed items as my necessary cover. My movement was abruptly halted by a low, powerful voice that cut cleanly and sharply through the silence from a point directly behind me. "That's enough crawling for the evening, manager. Your holiday exercise period is over, I think. Stand up slowly, put your hands clearly on your head, and then turn around very deliberately. Now, do not make me repeat that instruction." A third figure materialized from the darkness of the sporting goods section, positioned directly between me and the main exit doors. This one was taller than the others, clearly the leader, and in his hand he held a terrifying matte black handgun, the end of the barrel looking ridiculously large and ominously focused in the low light. He had seen me attempting to communicate on the failed radio. How long had he been patiently waiting in the shadows for me to make my inevitable move? And what was his intention in keeping me alive, rather than simply neutralizing me silently? I slowly rose to my feet, raising my trembling hands and interlocking my fingers behind my neck, the cold, stale air suddenly feeling heavy and impossible to breathe. "Please, the safe is equipped with a mandatory time delay lock. You cannot possibly open it for another 20 minutes. It's a required safety protocol," I stammered out, hoping desperately to appeal to their potential logic or any professional desire to avoid unnecessary complications. The leader simply chuckled, a dry, chilling sound that completely lacked any human warmth. I am acutely aware of your time delay safe, manager. I know the entire layout of this place better than you do, I assure you. We are not here tonight for the pathetic currency you keep locked away in your cash box. We are here for the specific contents of the secure receiving cage located directly on the mezzanine level. You see, that cage contains the high-value items, the limited edition drones, and the irreplaceable computer server components, the ones too valuable to be placed on the sales floor until tomorrow afternoon. Now, I require your thumbprint and your precise 6-digit access code for that cage. You will accompany me upstairs to disable the retinal scanner. We have exactly 5 minutes before the backup alarm is manually triggered from the central monitoring station. Get moving. The true, horrifying scope of their operation instantly became terrifyingly clear. They were not just common thieves hitting the floor stock. They were highly organized professionals targeting the deepest, most protected merchandise in the store, using my own access to bypass the final digital layer of security. Who had given them the exact schematics and the knowledge of the backup alarm protocol? Was this an inside job, and was one of my own absent team members the source of this betrayal? My mind raced violently, desperately searching for any way out of this immediate, life-threatening situation. The mezzanine level was accessible only by a single, open, glass-walled elevator, a slow-moving, exposed cage that would make me an absolute, defenseless target throughout the entire ride. I had to think of a way to create an insurmountable diversion that would not only halt their progress but also immediately alert the rest of my scattered employees. As we began the slow, agonizing walk toward the elevator shaft, passing the vast, dark expanse of the women's clothing department, I suddenly remembered the small, almost insignificant detail I had personally installed just last month. Beneath the last, large circular clothing rack near the fitting rooms, there was a specialized, commercial-grade floor cleaning robot, a heavy, remote-controlled unit used for deep cleaning the carpets once a week. It was currently scheduled for its nightly run, fully charged, and waiting beneath the skirts and sweaters. Its remote control was a small, sleek device that I always kept clipped securely to the inside of my pants pocket for immediate access. The leader's dark, intimidating presence was right behind me, the cold, hard certainty of his handgun pressed firmly against the small of my back. I kept my hands locked on my head, my face a mask of compliance, but I slowly, painstakingly maneuvered my left thumb to the precise edge of my work pocket, my movement disguised by the slight, natural sway of my body as I walked. Would I be fast enough to activate the cleaning bot before he realized my true intent? Would the noise it made be enough to cause the necessary immediate distraction? We reached the polished marble entryway of the elevator. The leader reached out a gloved hand toward the up button. This was my absolute last chance to act. In one single, fluid motion, I slammed my hand down hard onto the large, prominent red emergency stop button that was set into the wall beside the elevator panel, simultaneously jamming my thumb into my pocket and furiously hitting the activate button on the cleaning robot remote control. The immediate, shattering silence of the store was instantly broken by two competing sounds of pure chaos. First, the elevator lights immediately went dark, and a deafening, piercing klaxon alarm began to blare from the top of the frozen elevator shaft, signaling an unavoidable manual shutdown to the central monitoring station. Second, the floor cleaning robot, a massive, powerful machine weighing over 300 pounds, suddenly roared to mechanical life from beneath the clothing rack 60 feet away, immediately driving itself forward on its rigid cleaning path, crashing violently into the base of a towering, intricately arranged display of glass perfume bottles. The perfume display, a delicate structure of shelves and mirrors, instantly collapsed with a tremendous, deafening explosion of shattering glass, sending glittering fragments and heavy bottles cascading across the wide aisle in a spectacular shower. The leader, utterly startled by the deafening noise and the immediate powerful klaxon, flinched violently, momentarily removing the crushing pressure of the gun from my back as he instinctively pivoted to gauge the sudden, unexpected disaster. That fractional second of surprise was all the opening I required. I dropped instantly to the floor and kicked out hard and low with my foot, targeting his exposed ankle. He yelled in pain and momentarily lost his balance, dropping his weapon with a sharp, heavy clatter onto the marble floor. I didn't stop to grab it. I scrambled violently backward on the slick marble, turning and sprinting with every ounce of panicked energy I possessed toward the nearby, pitch-dark fire exit door near the loading bay. The only door I knew was guaranteed to open instantly with the push of a panic bar. The other two thieves, startled by the noise and now emerging from the shadows, were momentarily immobilized, confused by the flashing emergency lights that were now sporadically activating across the main floor and the relentless shriek of the building alarm. I slammed my body against the fire exit door's large, horizontal bar, and the heavy door instantly swung outward with a forceful metallic sound of heavy steel moving, allowing me to burst out into the cold, damp, glorious safety of the abandoned parking lot. I ran blindly into the darkness, not stopping until I was safely concealed behind the solid concrete pillar of a nearby bank's drive-through lane, frantically tearing my useless radio from my pocket and finally getting a faint, intermittent signal. I immediately shouted, "Code Red is active. Armed break-in. Loading bay fire exit. They are trapped inside. Call 911 immediately." I listened, heart hammering against my ribs, as the building's emergency lights continued to flash violently. I was out, alive, and the only cost had been a multi-thousand-dollar perfume catastrophe. My entire journey had been one long, agonizing string of unfortunate events, starting with a grueling 5-hour taxi queue and ending with a completely unforeseen 2-hour delay due to unexpected, heavy fog blanketing the city's runway. I was scheduled to be on the very last available connecting flight out of the state on Thanksgiving night, heading straight into the heart of the holiday weekend chaos. Now, standing alone with my duffel bag clutched tightly in my hand, watching a lone, tired cleaning machine move silently across the distant floor, I felt a deep, profound sense of vulnerability wash over me, a feeling intensified by the knowledge that all the normal security personnel and airport staff had seemingly vanished into the holiday night. I slumped heavily onto a cold plastic seat, pulling out my phone to search for any feasible alternative flight that might still be available, knowing with a certainty that bordered on despair that every single option would be fully booked until at least Saturday morning. As I scrolled through the grim, read unavailable messages, a man approached me, moving with a confident, measured pace that immediately set him apart from the usual frantic energy of travelers. He was wearing a dark blue, immaculate airport maintenance uniform, complete with a crisp name badge that identified him simply as Gary, Terminal Operations, and he carried a heavy ring of jangling keys that announced his authority. "Trouble with your connection, ma'am?" he inquired, his voice low, overly polite, and possessing a strange, unsettling resonance that echoed slightly in the quiet terminal. "The system shows the 12:45 to Denver was the final departure this evening. You won't find another flight leaving until the 6 a.m. run tomorrow morning, at the absolute earliest. I apologize deeply for the inconvenience, but that's the way these holidays always are. I know, I'm stuck, and I don't really relish the idea of trying to sleep on a metal bench until dawn," I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. I felt a small, foolish flicker of hope, seeing someone who actually looked competent and in charge. Could he possibly offer me access to a private, empty lounge or perhaps an unused gate area for a few hours of quiet sleep? Gary offered me a sympathetic, practiced smile, adjusting the heavy tool belt that hung low around his waist. "Oh, absolutely not. The main terminal is far too exposed for any kind of rest. The floor scrubbers start their loud routine at 2:30 a.m. What you really need is a quiet, secure place. Look, I can offer you access to the employee quiet zone. It's a small, unused security holding area down on the lower administrative level, completely quiet, fully carpeted, and with clean, working restrooms. I am just heading down there right now to perform a quick security check before my shift ends." The offer sounded incredibly enticing, a private, secure retreat from the harsh reality of the terminal floor. It felt like a small, unexpected miracle of holiday kindness. "Oh, really? That would be an absolute lifesaver. I truly can't thank you enough, Gary," I said, rising quickly to my feet, eager to follow him and secure a few hours of much-needed rest. "No need for thanks, ma'am. Just a little holiday spirit, that's all," he replied, giving me a dismissive wave of his hand. "We'll need to use the service elevator, though. The main escalators are already shut down for the night, and that area is entirely off-limits to the public, of course. Just follow me and keep your voice low. We don't want to alert the remaining private security patrols to our minor deviation from the rules." He led me away from the bright lights and the main concourses, navigating a confusing, increasingly narrow path through staff-only checkpoints and past rows of abandoned, locked retail kiosks. The heavy, reinforced door to the service elevator was nondescript, completely unmarked, and situated at the end of a long, dimly lit white corridor that felt miles away from any public space. He used one of his many keys to unlock the thick metal door, holding it open for me with a polite gesture. As the elevator descended with a slow, grinding mechanical noise, I began to feel a deep, uncomfortable prickle of unease slowly crawling up the back of my neck. The air in the shaft was thick, dusty, and strangely humid, smelling strongly of stale cigarettes and metallic rust. Why did an employee quiet zone require an off-limits elevator and a key to access it? When the doors eventually opened onto the administrative level, the atmosphere was instantly oppressive. It wasn't the brightly lit, modern administrative space I had imagined. It was a labyrinth of dark, low-ceilinged hallways lined with thick, concrete walls and heavy, solid doors. No carpet, no warmth, and certainly no sign of a comfortable retreat. The only illumination came from sickly, flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed loudly and incessantly overhead. Gary led me down a particularly narrow, winding corridor until he stopped in front of a heavy, unmarked steel door, pulling out a key that was visibly much larger and more complicated than all the others on his ring. He slid it into the lock and twisted it with a heavy, deliberate grunt. "Here we are, Quiet Zone 3. Nobody ever comes down here anymore. It is completely private," he whispered, pushing the heavy door inward. I stepped hesitantly inside. The room was small, perhaps 10 feet square, containing only a single steel-framed cot, a bolted-down steel desk, and a small, barred window too high to see through. It immediately felt less like a quiet retreat and significantly more like a secure holding cell. I instantly spun around to question him, but it was already too late. Gary was standing directly in the doorway, blocking the narrow opening with his large frame, and the friendly, practiced smile had entirely vanished, replaced by an expression that was cold, utterly devoid of sympathy, and completely predatory. He did not immediately close the door, but he slowly reached down to his waist, not for his jangling keys, but for a heavy, thick length of black, coiled industrial rope that had been cleverly concealed within his tool belt. "I apologize for the small deception, ma'am, but you were completely unwilling to sleep in the main terminal, and I truly needed a volunteer who was well and truly isolated," he said, his voice now lower and much harder, the previous politeness completely stripped away. "You see, tonight is a very special night for me. The airport security camera system is entirely on a low-power holiday loop. The staff is gone, and I have exactly 4 hours of uninterrupted privacy down here in the deepest part of the airport's underbelly. Your debit card information and your bank account login credentials are far more valuable than any discarded laptop you might be carrying. I need you to understand that cooperation will lead to a much quicker, much less painful resolution for both of us. We are going to have a lengthy, quiet little discussion about your financial records." My heart hammered so fiercely against my ribs I thought it would shatter bone. The chilling, horrifying realization was absolute. I was completely trapped in the deepest, most isolated section of the airport with a man who was clearly prepared for exactly this scenario. How long had he been planning this entire operation? And how many volunteers had he managed to lure into this terrifying, inescapable quiet zone before me? "Gary, please. Whatever you want, I will give it to you. My wallet is right here. Just take everything and leave me here alone," I pleaded, holding out my shaking hands. He did not move toward my wallet. He simply took a slow, deliberate step into the room, kicking the heavy steel door completely shut behind him with a decisive metallic thud that echoed with absolute finality. The door had no internal handle, only a solid, heavy steel plate facing the inside. We were locked in together. "Don't worry, I know exactly where your wallet is located, but I need more than physical cash. I require access to your actual digital life, your investment accounts, and your large retirement savings. You are going to give me all the necessary passwords, every single one of them. And the first password you will provide is the one for your high-limit Visa card. Let's start this quiet conversation now," he commanded, his eyes completely fixed on me with a terrifying intensity, the industrial rope held loosely but menacingly in his large, gloved hands. I backed up slowly until my spine hit the cold, unforgiving concrete wall. My mind was screaming for an escape route, any possible weakness in his meticulously constructed trap. My eyes frantically searched the small, bleak room, the steel cot, the bolted-down desk, the high, barred window. Was there anything in this bleak cell that could possibly be used as a weapon or even a desperate diversion? My gaze fixed on the bolted-down metal desk. It was old, scratched, and positioned directly beneath the single, constantly buzzing fluorescent light fixture. I noticed a thin, almost invisible seam along the back edge of the desktop. Perhaps it wasn't one solid piece of metal. The Visa password. It's my mother's birthday. I just need a minute to recall the month. I'm too panicked right now. I lied, my voice shaking uncontrollably. I took another slow step sideways, bringing myself closer to the desk. Gary's face darkened with impatience. "I am not a patient man, ma'am. You are wasting our precious time." He took a quick, aggressive step toward me, tightening his grip on the black rope. This was the final, critical moment. I lunged not at him, but at the heavy steel desk, grabbing the front edge with both hands and yanking backward with a desperate, sudden force fueled by absolute terror. The bolts holding the desk to the concrete floor held firm, but the thin metal seam I had noticed gave way with a loud, tearing metallic wrenching sound. The entire top panel of the desk ripped violently away from the frame, swinging upward and outward like a heavy metal shovel. The sharp, jagged edge of the ripped metal desktop slammed directly into the exposed, fragile fluorescent light fixture buzzing right above us. The bulb instantly exploded in a blinding, terrifying shower of white sparks and tiny glass fragments, plunging the entire small room into instant, profound, suffocating darkness. Gary screamed in genuine pain and surprise, the sound muffled by the sudden chaos. I heard the heavy clatter of the industrial rope dropping to the concrete floor. The darkness was absolute, thick and disorienting, and the only sound now was the rapid, shallow gasping of both of us. This was my only chance for survival. I immediately dropped to the floor, crawling low and fast beneath the terrifying chaos, scrambling to find the heavy steel door he had so carefully shut. My fingers scraped desperately against the cold, smooth metal until they found the keyhole, a small, tiny opening that provided no leverage, no escape. Even if I found the key, would I be able to turn it fast enough to escape before he recovered in the darkness? I didn't need the key. I remembered the nature of the lock itself. It was a heavy-duty, complicated deadbolt designed for maximum security, but I recalled from the muffled sound of the key turning that it had been one of the older, pin-tumbler mechanical models. I was wearing a pair of simple, but thick metal bobby pins clipped into my hair, a small, insignificant travel habit. I fumbled desperately for the pins, my fingers shaking violently, and thrust the two pieces of thin, flexible metal into the narrow keyhole. I couldn't see anything, so I had to rely entirely on muscle memory and the sheer, desperate pressure of my fingers. I bent one pin into a tension wrench and used the other as a pick, applying blind, frantic pressure. I heard a sudden, sharp metallic scraping sound from the darkness behind me, followed immediately by heavy, purposeful footsteps. He was recovering and moving in the total darkness. Where are you, you little idiot? You have just made this significantly worse for yourself. I will find you, Gary roared, his voice thick with blinding, frustrated rage. Click. A small, infinitesimal, blessed sound echoed in the darkness. The lock mechanism had yielded. I yanked the heavy door inward with a final burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, bursting out of the small, terrifying cell and stumbling headlong into the long, dark corridor. I didn't bother to close the door behind me. I sprinted blindly through the maze of administrative hallways, not looking back, relying purely on the dim, buzzing fluorescent light from the main corridor to guide me toward the distant, faint sound of the service elevator shaft. I found the shaft door, jabbed the up button repeatedly, and prayed with every fiber of my being that the elevator would arrive before I heard the heavy, pursuing footsteps behind me. The grinding gears of the elevator started its slow, agonizing ascent from the lower level, a sound that felt simultaneously like a death knell and a salvation. The doors opened. I threw myself inside the car, mashed the lobby button, and slumped against the cold, smooth metal wall, tears streaming down my face from the absolute relief and terror. As the elevator slowly began its climb, I saw a large, angry silhouette of a man burst from the hallway at the very last second, just as the closing doors finally cut off my view of the basement level. He was completely empty-handed, shaking his fists in impotent, terrifying fury. I was safe, ascending back toward the distant, cold light of the main terminal. I stumbled out onto the main floor minutes later, finding a single, unsuspecting security guard slowly walking his rounds near the abandoned check-in desks. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching his leg, my voice raw and broken.